Hello, welcome back to another of my favourite things videos. This time it's going to be looking at children's books, and again, as before, these are not best to worst. These are favourite to still loved but less favourite books, and in many cases the books are almost representative of a series as much as anything else. You'll have your own views and your own opinions, and be happy to hear any recommendations you might have that I can add to these. During the pandemic, I've read lots of children's books, more than I have adult books, which is unusual for me, but I just felt I needed something what I thought was lighter, but in fact turned out to be a revelation that there's so much depth and wisdom in many of these books. So here are my 10, starting with my number 10 all the way up to number 1. We're starting with a book which is very seasonal for this time of year that I'm recording this. This is Christmas at Nettleford by Malcolm Saville, and this is a book I do read regularly around about this season, and in fact have just completed a professional audio play, which is a sort of sequel to this. Malcolm Saville's books, his various series, are all great reads. They're very typical of their time, but this one, I think more than any, captures the season, the place, the atmosphere, the character of Christmas in a beautiful way. And in fact, the last chapter in particular is very moving. Not a lot happens. It's not a gung-ho adventure or terribly exciting, but the people in it are real, the situations are real, what they feel are real. And I often think when I read a Malcolm Saville book, that could have been me. He writes about childhood in a beautiful way. So that's my number 10. A more recent book is at number 9, and it's 5 Children on the Western Front, which is a kind of sequel to E. Nesbit's 5 Children and the Psammead books, which were very much of their period, sort of coming through Victorian times into Edwardian times. This is utterly brilliant. It captures the characters really well, but it brings them up to date, and you have some of the children grown up to be soldiers and going to war, and the Psammead allowing a glimpse of what happens to those children on the Western Front. It's hugely moving, one of the best World War I books I've ever read, one of the best books I've ever read, period, children or adult. It's fairly recent, can't recommend it highly enough. Kate Saunders does a genius job, and I love it. Yeah, one of the best books I've ever read. Next one, I couldn't pick one out of the series, but it's The Wombles by Elizabeth Beresford, which might surprise some of you. You remember them as a TV series with Bernard Cribbins and all the rest of it, or you remember them as a pop group. But the books are just genius, really. They're very funny. I got into them by reading them to my grandchildren, who had watched the videos online on YouTube and really enjoyed them. Lovely characters, quirky, very environmentally on the ball, beautifully written, and in fact I went on to read a lot of other books by Elizabeth Beresford, and her Magic series was really good as well. Just lovely, proper, in inverted commas, children's books. Another Malcolm Saville book next. Sorry, it hasn't got a dust jacket, but these are rather expensive to find as a collector. This is Susan, Bill and the Saucy Kate. It's one of the Susan and Bill series by Malcolm Saville. One of his least well known, but actually my all-time favourite. And again, I did an audio play with some professional actors based on the characters Susan and Bill. This is my favourite of the series, though it's possibly close run by others. Susan and Bill are just 2 very ordinary children to whom very ordinary things happen, but they look at those ordinary things and see them for the wonderful things they are. These books just are an appreciation of life. Malcolm Saville writes about childhood as if it is the most glorious time, and that everything, every day, every journey is an adventure. And there's something rather wonderful and really blessed about that, I think. Susan in particular as a role model for girls is fantastic. She takes no nonsense. She really bucks the trend of the way girls were portrayed at the time. She is independent, she is strong, she is not willing to take on the traditional female role, and she is wise beyond her years. There's a book in the series called The Bright Star Circus, and the last few paragraphs are just absolutely wonderful and beautifully written. But this is a particular favourite of mine, and it's probably the most exciting because it involves being marooned on a little island and all the rest of it. But can't recommend Susan and Bill more highly. Of all the Malcolm Saville series, probably people think it's the most childish, but I think it's the most childlike, the most likeable characters, and the most heartwarming stories. Highly recommended. I'm not sure how many of you will have heard of Arthur Catterall. He was really writing in the 30s, 40s, 50s and onwards. Famous for his books about seagoing sort of adventures, real boys' own stuff. The sort of stuff you might have read in comics like The Wizard and The Hotspur. He was a great writer, and I love those early boys' own stories. But in his later writing years, he wrote a lot about animals, and this one, Prisoners in the Snow, is really just what happens when you get snowed in an avalanche. And it's so beautifully written. The characters are so finely tuned. He knows how to write a story, he knows how to pace a story, he knows how to define characters. His descriptions are spot on, and I just think he's a wonderful author that we have lost. And Arthur Catterall's books, if I ever see them in a second-hand bookshop, no matter what the subject, I will always buy one. So whether it's about pirates or tugboats, or whether it's about smugglers, or in this case an avalanche, or animals, they're great books. Highly recommend Arthur Catterall to you. I was in Kendal earlier this year, and wandering around the Oxfam bookshop in Kendal, and just saw in the children's section for 25p this book, which is World's End in Winter by Monica Dickens. And I read it and realised that it was part of a series of 4 books by Monica Dickens, and I'd always classed her as a girls writer, pony writer, and there's a lot of ponies in this book, that's for sure. I remembered Follyfoot, the TV series, and I certainly remember the book because I read it as a child. But these books I thought were just a cut above. They are so well written. There are so much wisdom in them. Monica Dickens knows how to describe the passing of childhood, the nostalgia of what has been and can never be again. And the 4 books in this series really should make one big novel, and they're some of my favourite books. This could easily have been further up. The whole series is a favourite series. World's End in Winter, probably because I like books about Christmas and winter, is possibly my favourite of the 4. But every single one is a fantastic book. And because of having read this, I then went on to read some of her adult books, which I liked but didn't think were anywhere near as good. And I read the Follyfoot series, which I thought were really good, but not as good as these. So if you're going to read Monica Dickens, I can't recommend the World's End books more highly, and they're fairly easy to get a hold of. In 4th place, and just outside of my top 3, a book by Jill Peyton Walsh, who I hope you have heard of. She is a great children's writer, has written loads of books in lots of different genres, for teens, for adults. She wrote a brilliant set of books that were sequels to the Lord Peter Wimsey books by Dorothy Sayers that were absolutely fantastic. This is one of her many sort of books aimed at 11 to 14 year olds. Gaffer Samson's Luck, really short. It's about a young boy and his dying neighbour, and my goodness, it's moving. It's a book about grief, it's a book about death. It doesn't turn its head away. what a fantastic story. Such beautiful characters and such beautiful writing. And that is true of all her books. Dolphin's Crossing, about the Dunkirk experience in the Second World War, is a really good book. The Butty Boy, about canal boats in Victorian times, again another brilliant book. Her teenage books are fantastic, but this, I think, is a great book and an important book, and it's certainly one that I recommend to my grandchildren to read, because I suppose when we come to our own deaths as grandparents, they need to be able to face it, and this is the sort of book that helps young people realise what death is. It sounds miserable, but it's not a miserable book. It's a brilliant book. In my top three, Alan Garner, who has written lots and lots of fantasy books, the Weirdstone books, the Owl Service, which I love, Elidor, which I love, which is really good, Redshift, which is absolutely fantastic. But probably of all the books by Alan Garner that I've enjoyed the most, the Stone Book Quartet, there are 4 in the series, though you can buy it as one big chunky novel, is probably my favourite. This with his fairly recently published memoir, Where Shall We Run To, which I just absolutely adored. It's just simple, deceptively simple language, very evocative, very human, totally engaging and absorbing, and one of the best written books in the English language, I think. It is supposedly a children's book, but I have read it so many times over the years, I never think of it as a children's book. It's a book about growing up. It's a book about adults and their relationships with children. It's a book about the past and how we appreciate what has gone before and made us who we are. I love it. Alan Garner is a great writer. I've just bought his new novel, The Treacle Walker, and looking forward to reading that, and he's still writing brilliantly. So number 3, The Stone Book. Number 2 is representative of a series, really, and that's the Moomin books by Tove Jansson. I've read all of Tove Jansson's English translations of her adult material, and she's a great writer, but those adult books for me still don't match up to the wisdom, the fun and the joy of her children's stories, particularly the Moomin Troll stories. And of all of them, again, maybe it's because I'm recording this in winter, Moomin Land Midwinter, when Moomin wakes up when he should be hibernating and it's snowing everywhere. This is just such a fantastically evocative book of the season. It's again filled with relationships that are real and wisdom about those relationships. As an adult, I read them and think, gosh, that is so spot on. And if I was a child reading it, would I get it as much as I do as an adult? I don't know. The illustrations are fun, they're quirky, the writing is brilliant, the stories are great, and I can't recommend it highly enough. The Moomin books are my regular rereads. They're really absolute favourites, but they're not my number 1. What is number 1? Well, possibly you might have guessed, it's not a classic, though I do like a lot of classic children's books. I love Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson and Kidnapped, though perhaps they're really adult books masquerading as children's books. I love The Black Arrow as well by Robert Louis Stevenson. I love Anna Sewell's Black Beauty and those classic books. This is almost in that category because it's, written nearly 100 years ago. It's Swallows and Amazons by Arthur Ransom, and it's really indicative of a series because I love them all. Not sure which is my favourite. Possibly my favourite is Winter Holiday or Pigeon Post or Swallowdale, I'm not sure. But Swallows and Amazons I reread recently in the last couple of months, and I thought I knew the book because I'd read it so often over the years, And I thought it was possibly one of the weakest of the series, but I was wrong. It's just marvellous. The children are great, the evocation of childhood is great, the writing is of such a high quality, the descriptions are wonderful. There is nothing patronising about this book in any shape or form. It tells children a story of a world as it could be for them, but it's the real world. Things do go wrong, mistakes are made, people are hurt, friendships are broken and friendships are damaged. Adventures are there to be had, in the very small things to the very large things. And when you get to the later books like We Didn't Mean to Go to Sea and such like a Missy Lee, which are overseas adventures, it becomes a little bit more widespread or a little bit more universal. But this, which is very parochial, set in the Lake District, set really just in one small island in the Lake District, encapsulates everything that is good about the Swallows and Amazons series. If I was doing a Desert Island Discs, a Swallows and Amazons book would be one of the ones I take. So there's my 10 favourite things, children's books, 2 by Malcolm Saville, quite a few classics, a couple of modern ones like Kate Saunders. What are yours? Love to know. Put your comments below about what are your favourites, and I'll see you again on my next video. Thanks.